Hello everyone. One of my favorite things is finding a computer in a place where you wouldn't expect it. Weird industrial boards tucked away inside rack hardware that serves some benign purpose. I've looked at a couple examples of systems like that on this channel before. I think the best example being two pieces of satellite TV receiver equipment from International Datacasting, one featuring a Core 2 Duo and one featuring a Pentium 3, just tucked away in there. Both of those systems also featured an abundance of odd custom FPGA-based hardware as well. And what I have for you today is possibly the most fascinating example to date. An intriguing mixture of off-the-shelf PC components and weird proprietary cards that you'll never see anywhere else. Meet the Safenet GRK firewall. Now, this is pretty big. It's 1U rack size, but it's the depth of a full server. Now, I don't have the lid for this because this was destined for scrap. It was going to get just torn apart and recycled, and I said, no, give me that. And what is inside here is weird as hell. But before we get into that, let's just start going around the sides as usual. So on the front here, indicators for the two LAN ports on the back, USB-A, a weird connector that I later found out is just a serial port form factor that I'd never seen before, two PCMCIA slots with little like slot protectors installed from the factory. We'll look at the board those plug into later, screen for displaying the current status of the firewall, error messages, etc. And then finally one more serial port. Now these two serial ports are completely different functions. One of them connects directly to the firewall card and one of them is for managing the computer. And you'll see what the difference is a little bit later. I think you're already seeing because there's no lid. Unlike the International Datacasting hardware though, where you could clearly see the PC hardware sticking out the back, there's no indication at all. There's literally no visible indication that there's a computer motherboard in here. No parallel ports and audio ports and USB ports sticking out the back in the form factor that looks obviously like there's an ITX board in here. No, just three loud-ass fans, a power switch, and two Ethernet ports. From the back, you'd never know what's in here. It's a little bit of an assault on the senses because of just how much is inside here. There's a lot of hardware. Obviously, computer motherboard right here, and we're going to talk about this giant PCI card later, but whatever is on that card certainly needs a lot of cooling because none of the fans are actually pointing at the CPU. 1, 2, 3, 4 40mm fans are all directed for cooling this card and this card only. Of course, there are like glue logic kind of boards, things that are necessary just to supplement the existing functions of the system. Like, for example, these 3-inch RJ45 cables going into an RJ45 to RJ45 adapter board. And this is a custom-made board. It has a Molex power connector that plugs into it, not for the Ethernet, but actually for powering the three fans. And that's a theme that you're gonna see throughout this whole system. It has a lot of custom designed boards that are exclusively manufactured just for this system. So yes, it uses some off-the-shelf PC parts, which of course we're gonna get to later, like the board, the Sparkle power supply, etc. But a lot of its boards are completely custom made. For example, this front board that holds the USB port and the serial ports, it's connected to the board over USB-B. It has a place for soldering a battery to it, which is very interesting. And then these ribbon cables all running to the PCI card and to this. Now, what is this? I'll give you a little bit of a closer look at it here. So this is the carrier card for the PCMCIA cards that you'd put in the front here. PCMCIA cards were quickly replaced by compact flash in the mid to late 2000s, and they've since been replaced by SD cards. But for a little while, PCMCIA was a good storage medium. It was like the leading hot swap storage medium for storing small amounts of data, and that's exactly what this is for. So you can't put just any PCMCIA card in there. Like you can't put your FireWire controller card in here. It seems to exclusively be for PCMCIA storage. Now, something really weird about this board here is you'll notice the motherboard has two IDE ports. One of them goes to the hard drive, the other is unused. Now, PCMCIA storage uses literally the same pins and the same protocol as IDE. Yet instead of using IDE, this carrier card has its own little ARM controller. And it's a PCMCIA to USB micro B, mini B card. So I don't know why they didn't just plug it into IDE. It might have to do with the fact that there are two different ports and that might require two IDE channels. Master slave, IDE literally lets you do that. So I am a little bit baffled on why it's designed this way. Now, as mentioned earlier, the rest of the custom boards aren't particularly fascinating. They're just to tie aspects of the system together. But the real heart of the system isn't actually the PC motherboard. What facilitates most of the firewall's functions as a firewall is this card. Now, what is this card? That's a really great question. I was asking the same thing. This card is, I think, the strangest expansion card for a computer I've ever held. Covered on both sides by thick, blue, glued down aluminum heat sinks, it has its own CMOS battery, and its only I/O are two different sizes of serial ports. What could this possibly be? What on earth is this thing? Well, details on the firewall itself are difficult to find. However, this card is actually a little bit more popular. This is the VBD-030100 from Safenet, and this is a cryptography accelerator. This PCI card has support for about 10 different encryption algorithms and vastly speeds up encryption and decryption in real time, or at least as real time as it needs to be for gigabit Ethernet. Now, Safenet has since been acquired, but they still make very similar cards. They still make these data acquisition cards, as they're called, that encrypt and decrypt extremely rapidly. This is a PCI-X card. It's a 64-bit card. It has the row of extra pins for that, but the motherboard doesn't have PCI-X slots. I actually don't know what this form factor of PCI is. I've never seen this slot before, but it's not PCI-X. So it's a little bit odd that they'd choose a board that limits the capability of their card in a first-party appliance literally made by the same company. Anyway, let's talk about this board. So it's made by Radisys Technology. It's the BGB45G model. Radisys is a really common manufacturer of weird-ass industrial boards, and that's exactly what this is. This is a standard M-ATX form factor, but it has some features that you wouldn't find on most PC motherboards. Like, for example, the 2 gigabit Ethernet ports that require two different separate Intel Ethernet controllers. There they are on the board. By the way, this works, and we're going to fire it up pretty soon, and I'll, give you a little more overview of the board. Now, there are a couple clues on how old this board is. 20-pin ATX power connector, DDR memory, AGP. I was pretty confident that this had an earlier Pentium 4, maybe a NetBurst And sure enough, that is exactly what we have. Let's get this heatsink off. By the way, this heatsink is actually made by Sanyo, and it is fantastic. It may look thin and tiny because, well, it is thin and tiny. It's a really small heatsink, but it keeps this Pentium 4 without the lid of the chassis on, so optimal scenario, I guess, but it keeps this Pentium 4 well under 50 degrees under load, and I'm amazed by that. But yes, it is an early Pentium 4. That is a 2.8 gigahertz PGA 478 Pentium 4, but I found that extremely odd. I'm actually not sure how old this actually is. Between the PCMCIA cards, the Pentium 4 board, and the manufacturing date on some of the other things like the power supply and the fan boards and all that, they pointed to around 2004. And that's exactly what I'd expect for the computer hardware in here. But the Safenet card has a date printed on it that super clearly right there says 2009. PCI-X was far outdated by 2009, but I wonder if they used it anyway to make a card like this backwards compatible with previous generations of their firewalls using PCI as the main interface. So all of those factors combined together lead me to wonder if perhaps this firewall was made around 2004, and this is not an original card. It was either an upgrade from one that was already in there, or it was added later to accelerate something that had gotten a little behind the times. Yep, there it is. 2.8 gigahertz, 533 megahertz front side bus, and 512K of cache. By all standards, this is a pretty competent chip. Pretty fast for an embedded application, especially when a lot of the computation is being offloaded to a discrete card like this. A lot of the other embedded motherboards, weird industrial boards we've seen on this channel have all been weaker CPUs. Mobile chips intended for laptops or Celerons of the Pentium 3 era. So seeing a full-fledged, full-power desktop Pentium 4 in this system is a little bit surprising. Well, we've given the CPU a nice treatment. Y'all like my comically large thermal paste? That should bring temperatures down even further. Well, as you can see here, there once was a hard drive, but it was removed by the previous owner, who did, I will say, kindly include a little drug bag full of the mounting screws. But what I really wanted was the hard drive. So unfortunately that does mean that there's absolutely no hope of seeing what the system was actually set up to do as it was configured from the factory. However, what I can do is pull out another hard drive and just boot Windows XP on it, because after all, it's just a computer. So I've got this beautiful, lovely WD-1200. I'm just going to plug it up to the IDE ports and, well, have a little fun. Before we get into Windows, though, I do want to put this card back in. Although I don't actually have the drivers for it, it still does show up in Windows, you know, considering it's plugged into the computer after all. Though the board layout does make it less than convenient to do so, it still is possible to access many of the ports. There we are, 2800 megahertz. CPU is running at 33 degrees Celsius, so although the cooler may seem small, it's exceptionally competent. So, there it is, it's an 845 GeV chipset, a BIOS of 2006, Pentium 4 2800, of course, and there's our Radisys motherboard. And I think I might have said they had gigabit Ethernet earlier. It's just fast Ethernet, which is 10100, and there are the two 10100 Ethernet controllers there. If we open Device Manager, though, we can actually see Network and Computing Encryption/Decryption Controller. So there's that PCI card showing up right there. Now, of course, we're going to put this firewall to use doing what it was originally intended to do. So, of course, this is not remotely what this system was designed for. However, it's not half bad at it. This is Unreal Tournament at 1440 by 900, running on those Intel integrated graphics. Now, frame rate is not a problem at all. This is a really smooth, like 30 to 40 something FPS, it looks like. Oh, except for that explosion there, that brought it down quite a lot. But there is a whole lot of input lag that makes it just generally unpleasant to play. It's certainly not unplayable. Oh shit, it's certainly not unplayable. Just not the most pleasant experience. So if you have a Safenet GRK-007 firewall, I wouldn't recommend playing Unreal Tournament on it with the Intel integrated graphics. That's the moral of the story. That should be your one and only takeaway from this video. Well, that's all I have to say for today. You will be seeing this system come back in the future. I have lots of plans for it, considering, for one, this is the first working board with AGP that I've ever had. And it's just a really interesting system. So I'm really glad that I picked this up, not just because it's weird hardware, but because the PC motherboard in here is actually a pretty nice motherboard as well. But anyway, that is going to wrap it up for this one, so thank you everyone so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, I hope you'll come back next time.